Happy Easter. So why do we Christians say Happy Easter? Is it because the 40 days of Lent are finally over? And now I get to go back to eating sweets, having meat on Fridays.
And my donut every Sunday morning.
Okay. There's no donuts today, Deacon. But I'm sure you'll find one. Or is it also that we get to watch television and the list goes on and on and on? Well, I'm sure if we're honest with ourselves, that's part of it. We're glad that the penance and the self-denial of Lent is past. But remember, prayer, fast, and almsgiving, we emphasize them in Lent, but really those are daily, year-long practices, what it means to be a disciple. Maybe the responsorial psalm, the refrain from today's psalm, says it best. Today, this is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad. We have not just today, not just 50 days to celebrate Easter, but we are a resurrection people. We are called to be an Easter people. But we know that we don't get to Easter without Good Friday. And so just as Jesus walked the way of the cross, so you and I are called to pick up our cross and follow after him. But why should we rejoice and be glad? For some of you this past year, you've lost loved ones. Some of you may have lost a job. Some of you may be struggling to make friends in school or to get along with coworkers, or just dealing with some major health issues. That doesn't sound like much of a reason to rejoice. Unless we hear what St. Paul said in today's second reading to Colossians. My apologies, but in your program it says the second reading is from 1 Corinthians. Father got it mixed up and he prepared his homily based on the other reading. So since it's all about me, we changed the reading. But no, it's not all about me. It's all about Jesus Christ. Father Island, as well as all of us, are nothing in comparison to him. Our whole reason for living is to become an Easter people. Unless we become an Easter people, we will never be able to share that good news with others. We will never build a culture of life, and we'll continue to go down to building a culture of death. It's so apparent in today's culture that so many people do not know the person of Jesus Christ. It's important that you and I receive this good news, because unless we receive it, we'll never be able to share it. St. Paul says, "If then you were raised with Christ, seek what is above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God." In other words, our true happiness, our ultimate joy, as St. Paul says, is above, not below, not what is on earth. For example, let's say you woke up today after a good night's rest, and the sun is out. It wasn't at 9 o'clock, but it is. And you didn't have to go to work. In fact, the day was yours. You could engage in your favorite hobbies. You could get together with family and friends. And you got to end the day with a great meal. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? You'd feel pleased in the day. You'd feel happy. In fact, you'd even have some maybe measure of joy. Now imagine your son or daughter was getting married to Mrs. or Mr. Right, or your parents, or you became parents for the first time, or grandparents for the first time, or maybe for the first time in your life, you experienced the love of God. You really knew that God was real and that he loved you. That wouldn't just please you or make you happy. Those things would give you great joy. In our life and society, though, so often we confuse pleasure and happiness with joy. But joy is something much deeper, something much more profound, something much worth striving for. But so often you and I settle mainly for pleasure instead of joy. It is right to connect those two together. Pleasure and happiness and joy are called to be connected. In fact, we encounter some joy when we're pleased to be with family and friends. Just as we experience, because of the joy we feel, we have a pleasure or happiness because of this event or celebration, be it an anniversary, a wedding, a birthday, an ordination that we get to go to. But unfortunately, we so often put pleasure and happiness in place of joy or at the service of joy. And if only we can get that college scholarship, if only we can marry that right person, if only we can find that dream job, life will be good, I'll be happy. Well, that doesn't happen. We know those happen sometimes. But remember, life is not dependent, our joy is not dependent on circumstances. We all know the pain of the cross in our life from time to time, but yet we're called to be a resurrection people. St. Mother Teresa was one of the most joyful people we've ever met, even though many didn't realize for 50 years she went without a sense of God's presence in her life. It amazed those that read the biography that her spiritual director wrote about her. But it's because she knew the love of God in her life before then, and the fruit that was born in her life showed that God was living and active. But she was also at times hard on her sisters, that unless they were ready to go serve, she would tell them to go back to their room until they put on the right attitude. Sometimes they didn't feel happy or pleased, but she knew that unless they were willing to bring the love of Christ to the sick, the suffering, the destitute, how could we ever help them to know God's love in their own lives? And so, in the resurrection today account in the Gospels, we see that even though I'm sure they were despairing, crestfallen, it was the women that went to the tomb because they were still seeking Jesus amidst life's difficulties and circumstances. And imagine the joy that they received when they heard the news that Jesus was no longer dead, but had been raised from the dead. That was a joy they could not keep to themselves. They didn't walk to the disciples to tell them, they actually ran. You can imagine how fast they ran because they couldn't get it out fast enough. And so this great news gave them in turn also pleasure and happiness, but it was because of the joy of Jesus Christ that they knew that they were loved. They knew that they weren't abandoned. And so the resurrection brings us a deeper joy than we can ever experience in our daily life. In fact, we know some days will be better than others. But we know that since grace is only operative in the present moment of each day, not in the past, not in the future, God has already been there or we haven't arrived there in the fullness of time, that we're called to live as mature Christian disciples, that our pleasure, our joy is not dependent on circumstances, but because of the love that God has for me. You know, if we truly believed how much God loved us, if we truly believed, we couldn't help but share that good news. This past Tuesday, I ended a 7-week Lenten Bible or a book study a book by Dr. Edward Shree called Who Am I to Judge? And in that book, he really sets the record straight in helping us understand that when God created us, and even before he created us, he had us in his heart and his mind. We were already in relationship with him. And he knew that man, as we are, was only beginning of who man is called to be. I'm made in the image and likeness of God. And who is the image and likeness of God? It's truth and love. And so he's ordered our life to eternal happiness, to eternal joy. But we don't get there until we live that life of resurrection as we walk this earth. And so we do that recognizing that God is real, that God loves me, and then I strive to live a life of Christian virtue, called to live a moral life. That itself will lead me to freedom. It will lead me to right relationship. It will lead me to the eternal happiness and joy that each and every one of us seeks. But in our lives, so often in our culture, we're speaking two languages. We try to speak about the sanctity of human life. We try to speak about the marriage, the sacrament of marriage given to us in the order of creation and the order of sacrament. We try to talk about religious freedom. But unless we've introduced to others the love and mercy of God, it's like two ships passing in the night. If they don't know Jesus Christ, then they're never going to understand the importance of the sanctity of life, their own life and ours, the gift of marriage and family, and the gift of religious freedom. So the onus is on us, on Catholics and Christians. Be the first witnesses in what it means to live the Christian life. As you go back today to be with family and friends, we're celebrating the joy of Easter, but can we keep that Easter joy tomorrow, the next day, the day after? Because it's easy to love when it's fun, when it's pleasurable, when it's romantic, when it's easy, but to love when we're faced with the circumstance of the cross, that's when it's hard. And so this kind of joy, we know, can be difficult at first. But just because we're baptized Christians doesn't automatically give us such joy. We need to respond to God's grace. Remember, grace is the life of the Trinity in us. We can do nothing good without grace. Because we reflect back to Ash Wednesday, when we see the ashes to remind us of our mortality. You and I are made from the dust of the earth. The last time I checked, dust was not capable of anything good without grace. So everything we have in life, anything good, is a grace, is a gift. Even the cross, the greatest of gifts. And so this usually starts, we begin to experience that joy in our life when we take our faith seriously. We're more intentional about living our faith in truth and love. When we come to Mass every Sunday, not just when we feel like it. When we spend 10 or 15 or 20 minutes a day in prayer. Because prayer doesn't change God, it changes us. It helps develop that personal relationship. It does me no good to believe that God exists if I don't invite him into my heart. The way I invite him into my heart is by telling God everything that's going on in my life, each and every day, the good, the bad, and the ugly. He knows what I'm going to say before I say it, but he wants to hear it from us as any good father would. And so the more I take my faith seriously, the more I develop that personal relationship, the more I want to share that joy in serving others. That's why not only our St. Patrick mission statement, but our Christian mission statement really is loving God and our neighbor as ourselves. God first, others second, myself third. If I have that backward, I'll never experience the joy that God wants me to receive. And that's why we come to church not for what I get out of Mass or even serving what I can get out of serving others. I come to give. And when I give, I open the doors of my heart to receive. It's very counterintuitive, but that's how it works. And the more I receive, the more I can't keep that good news to myself. In life, you and I have pleasure and happiness, and we have joy. So often we confuse those. However, when we reflect on today, on the reason for our joy, we understand that not just happiness or pleasure, but joy is what truly matters. As we believe in the risen Lord today, you and I experience joy. And we do, let's begin sharing that joy with others. Happy Easter.